Have you ever wondered what it takes to shoot your way from indie films to the set of Disney, Paramount, Lionsgate, and some of Hollywood's biggest studio? Today we are talking to someone who's already done that, and in this video we are going to talk to him and learn more about his technique, what makes him unique, and everything else that contributes to his visual storytelling.
Mark Wahlberg was never out on that runway with us, even though there's a shot where you clearly see him on that airfield.
Was that CGI or how did that happen?
So we shot him.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that young DPs make when trying to make their work look cinematic?
Because I did it too. I did it too. When you're young,
we're all guilty of that. Do you think it's important to rent or buy as a DP?
Wow, that's an interesting question. This is my biggest piece of advice, at least the way I look at my career and myself.
Johnny Derango, welcome to the blocking room. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you, my friend?
I'm very good. How is everything going over there?
Everything's good here, man. Just finished up a Lionsgate movie called I Can Imagine 2. Been back in LA about 3 weeks, and now I'm packing up my whole apartment to do a little move here. So it's been a little hectic, but very blessed.
You've been very, very busy recently. How does that mean to you as someone who used to dream about being in a position where you are to now like living everything like, okay, now I'm living that dream? How does that mean?
It's pretty amazing, man. When I take the time to really sit down and think about it, like I said, I'm incredibly blessed to come from like a little town in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. A beautiful place, but just not a place where you would dream big like that. You know, you'd pick a real job, you know, and you'd probably stay in that town for your whole life. But I had really supportive parents who helped me with my dreams, and you know, moved to Los Angeles, and now I'm shooting studio movies, which is surreal in itself.
And this is actually for people that have parents maybe that do not understand their full dream and vision. Has there been a time where you'd be like, Dad, I told you it's going to work?
So for me, it's interesting because my parents, my father's a dentist and my mom was a nurse who ended up working in my dad's office for his entire career. And growing up, I fell in love with movies. There was nothing more important to me than like, it was my escape. I loved movies. It showed me what different parts of the world were like. It showed me what other people's experiences were like. It was my escape. So I'd go into my bedroom, I'd go to Blockbuster Video, or I don't even think we had a Blockbuster in our town at the time. I'd go to the little video store and rent titles that you couldn't find anywhere else, things that were festival movies and stuff like that. And I would lock myself in my bedroom and just dream, and I loved it. And I didn't think of filmmaking as something that I could do. So I was a huge action movie fan. I loved like Die Hard and Speed and movies like that. And then TV shows like Homicide: Life on the Street and stuff like that. So I thought that I wanted to be a homicide detective or a U.S. Marshal. So what I was going to do was my freshman year in college, I was enrolled in all criminal justice classes. And I told my parents that that's what I was going to do. And they got really, really nervous. And they're like, isn't there anything else that you might want to do with your life? Because they feared for my safety. So I honestly think if I was like, I want to make movies my entire life, they would probably been like, hey, why don't you get a real job? But because I picked a career that might put myself in jeopardy, they were like, let's find something else. So that's my advice to anyone else. If your parents really love you and they're concerned about your safety, pick a job that's dangerous, and then maybe they'll support you in the long run for your dreams.
Now that's really good. And now that you spoke about, obviously, you dreaming about films and stuff, and my first question is that what drew you to like a particular script or like a visual? Like a director comes to you and send you a script. What is one thing that pulls you into that for you to start working with?
So it's really interesting for me as a DP. When I read a script, I try not to envision any of the visuals, which is really hard as a creative person. I try not to picture the lighting. I try not to picture the camera movements. Because I become overwhelmed and I really start to get caught up in the minutia. So when I read a script, I really, really, really want to focus in on the story. I want to know if I connect to the characters, if I feel like it's a compelling story, if it's something that I'd want to watch myself. And if it checks all those boxes, then I'm like, okay, who's the director? Who's going to be the talent in this movie? Do I think that it will be a fantastic film? And do I think that there's something I can actually add myself? And then from that point, I'll go talk to the director and hear the director's pitch, his or her pitch on the movie.
Yeah.
And if it's something that I feel like we're sort of in the same vein what we want to do, or if I can help them with their vision, then that's when I'm all in on a project.
Now that's great to hear. Obviously, like listening to that, one thing that I would ask is that how do you approach building like a visual language for like a movie?
So yeah, like I said, my first thing is I really want to get in the director's head and I want to understand what they're looking for. I want to know, because there's some DPs who will come in and overwhelm and just do their thing and push to do the movie that they want to make. But I've said this before, I want to be the salt to the dish. I don't want to overpower the dish. I want to bring out the flavor of the dish. I want to know what you're thinking, and I want to make the best version of your movie. And that for me is the coolest part, because I could go do a movie and every single movie I did could be exactly the same, feel exactly the same, look exactly the same. But I want to infuse what I do into that particular director's vision. And I think if you look at my body of work, it's very diverse and it feels very different, yet there's some sort of cohesive visual style that goes through all of them. I think you can look at a movie that I've shot and go, okay, I feel Johnny Derango in this movie, but I also feel this director.
Okay, that's very important from what you just said, because I remember my first interaction with you was when you was doing the Panasonic Evo 1 back in the days. And from there, I've seen from Small Town Crime, from so many other things that you've done. It is different, but it has that stylistic Johnny Derango, kind of like a visual signature, if you will. And my question is, from that time when I saw you at Panasonic stage, obviously we never knew all this thing was going to happen. What is one thing that you say have changed since then, and how is your way to making that change?
Oh man, I think as an artist, you always visually evolve. And I think that comes from the experiences of the people that you work with. And again, that's why I love working with so many different directors and doing so many different diverse projects. And it's the same thing with crew. I just did a movie in Nashville and I worked with one of the best crews that I've ever worked with. And I learned things from each and every one of them. And I did a movie in Tulsa the summer before, and I learned things from that gaffer and that crew and the operators that I work with. And it's collecting all these things. And it's something that I actually had been doing on my own for years, but I really learned from Mel Gibson when I did Flight Risk, was you surround yourself with the best people and you let them offer their ideas. And you have your own ideas, but you pick the best idea, and best idea wins. And I just did a movie with Andy Irwin, and that was sort of his philosophy too. This movie called I Can Only Imagine 2, and it's best idea wins. And that collaborative spirit is my favorite part of filmmaking.
That's great. So obviously my platform is full of people that want to be somewhere in the industry. And the thing that I would like to ask you from experience, how would you say you balance your creative freedom with the director's vision? Apart from everything else that you say, obviously you called to the director, you spoke to them, and then how do you be like, okay, this is my style, and how does that conversation happen?
Yeah. So for me, over the last, 10 years or so, my process has really changed. My pre-production time is the most important time to me. And it's really sitting down with the directors, really understanding what they're about, what they want to do, and how I can help that. And I could send you some material. Maybe you can post it with the episode or whatever.
I want to.
Okay. So what I do is I now do an overhead and a shot list for every single scene. So I literally go into the location, I do an overhead based on the actual location, I plot out the actors where I believe they will be, and where the cameras are going to be if the actors are there. And now sometimes it changes based on blocking on the day if something is an anomaly or an actor wants to do something else. But most of it is planned out well in advance, and then it gives you the freedom on the day to know, okay, we have this plan, it's going to be a great plan, we can execute it like this, or we may pivot and do something completely different, but at least we have an idea of what we're going to do.
Okay, so that also highlights the importance of pre-production.
Yeah.
Because I feel like so many young people really skip that part, and they're just like, I want to shoot things that looks good.
Sure, and when I was younger in my career, I didn't realize the value of pre-production, and a lot of it I think was because pre-production at that stage is on your own. You're not being paid for it. It's your own time, and as I've gone further and further in my career, I realized that that's make or break. When I show up on set, I should be at ease knowing that I have a plan, that I already know where all my lighting is going. I know how the camera is going to move. I know the beats of the day. And on this last movie, I think we did 2 days that were 12 hours or longer. Everything was under 12 hours. We made every day, and the stuff looks beautiful.
Okay, so speaking about preparation and pre-production, what is that one thing that made you say, okay, today John, I need to take so much focus on pre-production? And how has that helped? Because I was actually doing a project and I sent so many things to the person I was collaborating with. They didn't check them until when we was on set. And I found myself re-explaining over and over again.
Yep.
And hence why I'm asking this question, because I feel like people don't really understand that a good film relies on preparation. And if you don't do that, then you're just going to be improvising and things that doesn't really mean anything.
So at that point, I would say pick better collaborators.
Do you know what?
No, it's the funny thing for me is, even I've been in that situation where you put in all that hard work, you do all that preparation, and you've distributed it to everybody, and you show up on the day and people haven't read it. Even in that situation, it's been such a great exercise for me personally to understand the material better, to know what I'm going into, to know what I'm doing. I mean, I've taken up this thing over the last 4 movies where my wife and myself will actually do an audiobook version of every script that I'm shooting. So we will read line for line, record it through the voice memos. Yeah, voice memos on the iPhone. And then when I'm there the night before I'm shooting, I'll play the scenes and I'll listen to the scenes and I'll try to visualize the scenes. Or when I'm in pre-production and I'm working through the scenes, I'll play it as I'm trying to draw out my overheads to think about where the camera's going to be. So that has been a new thing for me that's immensely helpful.
Another thing that I've seen recently, I think it might be because of the budget as well. So many people would have an idea of what they want to shoot without seeing the location. Has that ever happened to you, and how do you overcome that?
It has, and there's times even on bigger movies where for some reason the location will fall out. You know, like on this last one, the very last day of shooting, our location fell out days before we were supposed to shoot, and we're in production, so you don't really have time to look at it. So we got called an hour and a half one day before we started shooting at a different location to look at this location.
Wow.
So it was like 2 days before, and you know, you have to have your gaffer there, you have to have your key grip there, people like that, because it was a big night exterior, right? So you need to see where you're going to drop your condor to get your lighting, where you're going to do that kind of stuff. And you just have to pivot. I mean, I took over a movie last year 48 hours before we started shooting because the DP was hospitalized. And this was a big MGM Amazon movie that was a period piece. So you at that point you have to rely on your years of experience and just the repetition of having done it. Because you get dropped into a situation like that, it's sink or swim. It's really tough, especially when you know a studio's looking at the dailies.
Yeah.
You haven't had, so another DP had 6 weeks of pre-production. I had 48 hours, right? So and that it turned out extremely well, and that movie will be in theaters in November. You know, so yeah.
Speaking about sink or swim situation, has there been a time where you decided something and your mind is telling you it might not work, but you just say, okay, let's go for it, and then at the end it's so rewarding?
Yeah, there's definitely situations like that. You know, the first time I ever flew a moonbox, I was so excited because I had this giant moonbox up in the air and it was covering the set, and I looked at it and I go, it just looks like daylight. Everything's too flat and everything's too bright. And I'm like, did I make a mistake putting all the time and effort into doing this? And then, you know, then you start bringing in other lights and you shape it on the ground. And, you know, I did like a push of a warm light off a house, and all of a sudden I started to see it build up, you know, like I would normally do. But it's in that moment where, you know, you've spent, you know, the production's money to get something big up in the air for the scene. And the entire lighting of it is based on this idea that you had. And then you're like, I'm not sure if this is working, right? So then you have to start making adjustments and stuff. But yeah, the first time I did that, I was really nervous when I looked at that monitor the first time. And then as I shaped it in by, you know, 30 minutes into it, I was like, okay, I can breathe again. This is going to be great.
Okay. One thing that I'm still trying to figure out on the level of stuff that you do, on everything that you've just explained,
Uh-huh.
do they look at you like, what is he doing? Why is he taking time? Or do they like, what happened?
So there's definitely times when that happens. It happens, and that's not a good feeling when people are looking at you going, "Come on," I've been in the situation where the director's like, "I need more time with my actors. Figure this out," and you do, and you make it happen. It's never gonna. I was talking to somebody who is working on one of the biggest movies in Hollywood right now, and they said they heard the DP get chewed out the other day for not being ready for a certain situation, right? And I'm like, wow. I mean, this is levels and levels even above where I am right now. So it happens, it's, you always have to be thinking forward. You always have to be anticipating. You have to know the directors you're working with.
Yeah.
It's harder if it's the first or second time you're working with a director to anticipate that. But if it's a long-term relationship, you got to be ready to go and know what their feelings on things are, their dispositions, the way they want to do things, and anticipate it.
Speaking about obviously being a great collaborator and working with the director, my question is, how do you build trust with the director?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that for me on the last few movies has been built in that pre-production process. I you get into the room and you get the job because of your past work and things people have seen. And I think a lot of times I get the work because people can sense my collaborative spirit and my good attitude and the fact that I will run through a wall for my director. I'm a DP's director. I will defend my directors till the end, and I think they really feel safe with me. That's super important to me. Then after the pre-production process, it becomes that on-set process where they see what you're doing, the speed at which you're working, how you're helping them get more time with the actors, how you're helping them achieve the look that they've envisioned in their mind. I think all those little things add up to this point where a director can trust you.
Speaking about being on sets, we're actually going to talk about Fatman before we dive into Flight Risk. That was filmed in Ottawa, Canada, isn't it?
It was.
First question, how do you create a real world that feels natural? And I'm actually referring to Chris's house farm or homestead.
Yeah.
Do you know, when I look at that, there's something that I liked, like his edge, his character profile, and the look and the lens, it just felt right. Like, take me, like, I want to learn that from you. When I saw this, I'm like, John, are we talking next week?
I appreciate that, man. That one was a really special one for me. That was my, I think, fourth film with the Nelms brothers, who are brilliant. Those guys, they can navigate tone like very few filmmakers, to take something that's super funny 1 minute and then super dark and violent the next minute. So I really love working with them. And they had written this script, and it was dead serious. It was the craziest concept, but they never wanted it to be jokey. They wanted it to play in this real, like, serious tone the entire way through. Like not Hell or High Water, but No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
So when I was making that movie, my directive, I called that movie No Country for Snowmen. Like, that's what I wanted that to be. I wanted it to always feel really grounded. And so when we did Chris's homestead, we found this incredible property. It was a farm, and we built that barn. They faced that barn to make it look like it was. And it's interesting because I would never call my photography like super gritty. There's that kind of look that looks unlit and real rough. I feel like I have a stylized grittiness. I don't really know how to explain it. It still feels polished, yet it feels raw at the same time, if that makes any sense. So I wanted it to feel unlit, but still beautiful. And some of that stuff that I love the most is like when Chris goes up into the bedroom after he gets home from delivering Christmas presents, and he walks up into his house and he's been shot and you don't know, and he goes through the bedroom and then he goes into the bathroom. Stuff like that. I wanted it to have this weird sort of juxtaposition where he comes in out of the cold, and then he goes into his house, and his house is this nice warm beacon in this cold area, but still felt natural. And so that's really what I concentrated on in lighting that stuff. And then you have the juxtaposition, and it's really interesting because it's not the way that I traditionally would have lit a movie. I'd usually more use a visual continuity all the way through, but I broke that in that movie intentionally. So if you watch like Walton Goggins, when I shoot anything with him outside of the North Pole, it's all very hard. It's very directional light. It's very polished. I wanted to set those two worlds apart.
I see. And again, I'm gonna stay on that scene because I feel like that's one of my favorite scenes. Like I could see layers of lights that felt
Uh-huh.
so natural. How do you build that? Is that like, oh, this is one thing that again I'm trying to understand. Like, do you be like, okay,
Mhm.
today we're gonna put a bounce here, we're gonna reflect here. Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. So it's being able to look at a space and go, okay, I see how the light naturally comes in this way, right? So in that space, when I looked at it, we had, I believe, there was a one window on the back wall. There was a fireplace or like a wood burning stove here. There was some windows on here. So I knew that that window back there would give an interesting sort of glow, and that I could push my harder light from the right side of frame to be a nice light on him when he came in.
Yeah.
So it's just understanding your angles and where the light can come from and where you need to remove light. I probably had negative on the left side of the room to create shape. That's something that I probably didn't understand early enough in my career, just taking away light and how important
Yeah.
that is. And by that same token, something I learned on that movie when I was doing my tests, and it seems that no matter how far along you go in your career, time to test is never what you would like. You never get as much time to test. But I took the camera outside and I started looking, and this I think feeds into the reality of the situation. When you're outside, your natural inclination is to light your actor to be the key, the brightest thing in frame or near brightest thing in frame, right? So when I looked at that and you started to add light to an actor outside in the snow, it just became a mush of just bright. So if you
Oh,
look, I did something with like reverse contrast. When they're outside in the snow, the actors are generally down like a stop and a stop and a half
yeah.
from the snow. And then you get this beautiful contrast. If you went the other way, it would have looked like nothing. So there was times where you're throwing black solids down on the ground to take away some of the light or the bounce of the reflection. Mostly doing that rather than adding light in those situations.
I saw you giving away some books on Facebook. And here's the
Okay.
question. How much does reading makes you a great DP or storyteller?
It's so important, man, just to understand other people's processes, even if it's not the same process that you may use or you may execute, to have that knowledge of how people achieve different things and then find the way that works for you.
Yep.
And there's one magazine that I held on to, and it was an interview with John Seal from, I can't remember what year it was, but when he shot the movie Poseidon. And it's something that stuck with me and has been one of the most immensely helpful things in my career. And I'll probably post this on Instagram today because it really struck a chord with me. And this is years ago. He talked about when you're lighting a movie and you're shooting a scene, right? And every shot does not have the same value. So there's something that might be on the screen for 2 seconds versus something that's going to be on the screen for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Don't waste your time finessing everything on that shot that's going to be on the screen for 2 seconds. Because earlier in my career, I would get hung up in every single shot had to have the same value.
That's
And
where I
it's
am
not.
now.
It's tough, but you have to make those decisions. And I'm not saying make things sloppy, but sort of weigh it out in your head and go, okay, this is only going to be on the screen for a brief second. Let's concentrate on the stuff that's going to be really important. And that really changed the way I looked at things. I don't get as hung up on every shot as I used to. And I allow that time that I would have used to make that first shot that you're barely going to see. I've now moved that time to the second shot that you're going to see much longer. So it's
Oh,
balancing out and weighing out what's the most important thing based on how long it's going to be on the screen and how important it is to the story.
that's some very important thing that I'm going to take away from this. And would you say that before starting, do you now highlight, okay, these are the most important scenes, or these are the ones that I don't need to focus on too much? And then how does that work? Or you just like instantly know this shot is going to last 2 seconds or what?
Yeah, so some of it is that, and some of it is in that pre-production process. Again, going okay when I put down my shot list and I look at my overheads, going okay, this shot will just literally pull back off the actor to open the scene, and then I'm out,
Oh,
or it's going to come up off a coffee cup and turn around to his face, or something like that, and then I know okay, that's great, and then okay, he's going to look this way he's going to look to the left for 1 second. It's the only time we're going to look that way in the scene. So I'm not going to waste all my time doing a huge flip for that. I'm going to
yeah.
find the best way to maximize my time for that one look, that kind of thing. So you just weigh it out. And I think you start to understand it really quickly if you can visualize. The most important thing is being able to visualize a scene in your head. And
Yeah.
listen, I'm 23 years into this, and there's times that I still have trouble. I mean, it's like writer's block. There's
Yeah,
scenes
yeah, yeah.
where you'll go to breakdown in your mind and you can picture 2/3 of it, and then all of a sudden you can't picture the rest of it. Or a scene where you can picture every single shot. Like I remember when I was doing the movie Unsung Hero. The movie, I don't know if you've seen Unsung Hero, but the movie opens in a room where it's like a customs and immigration room, and it's a mom and her 6 kids and her husband. So I could have come in on a wide shot, right? And you could have seen the whole room and you could have had an idea what was going on. But I chose to start in on her face tight, knowing that the movie was going to end in that same frame. So I was going to bookend the movie. So I start here and I pull out, and there's this activity going around her, and you don't know where you are or what's happening. And it's just really interesting because it instantly becomes compelling because you're like, where am I? Who is this person? What's going on? And it pulls out, and it keeps pulling out until you see her. And then this officer walks over, and we leave with the officer, and we go down the line of 6 children, and it follows the officer, and it comes back to her. It wraps around her and comes back to her. So I've created this shot that I visualized. It was the first thing that popped into my head when I was working through this script. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna open the movie and close the movie with the same frame, because at the end we'll push into her and end in the same frame. I'm gonna put you in a situation where you don't know what's going on, so you have to like lean in and figure out what's going on, who is this person, why am I here? And then it's really interesting because it's a woman who's clearly in distress and her children who don't know what's going on, and then it cuts to a flashback and you start to piece the story together. So it's that kind of stuff where there's times you want to subvert the audience and make them think and engage them right off the bat, and that was one of those situations that I was really proud of the way that worked out.
Still talking about Fatman. Now we jump in the factory floor.
Yes.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you love practical more than I would say, like, because I've watched it, I'm like, this feels like a real place where lights just fall naturally. Where do we start? Do we start with practicals and then build it up, or is the other way around?
It's really funny with that one. There was nothing in there.
Is there?
It was an old Hershey factory. I believe it was a Hershey chocolate factory. That was nothing but a concrete box, and it was the coldest place I've ever been in because it was in Ottawa in the winter.
Yeah.
And the temperature got down to negative 30 degrees at times outside. And when you're in a giant concrete bunker, I've never felt cold radiate up through my feet like it did in that, because it just comes out of the concrete and goes right up into your feet. And it was freezing. So I had this idea in my mind where I wanted these real sourcey spots coming down, because the picture that the brothers had painted for me was, this is like Industrial Revolution factory. It's not beautiful. It's utilitarian. And so that was the directive. So I was like, I got all these China hat lights, which were, I don't know, maybe this big in diameter. And the production designer, I think we had probably about 50 of them. And we globed them up. My gaffer was a guy by the name of Mateo Gonzalez, who's fantastic. He globed them up, and I went to look at them, and I put atmosphere in the room, and I couldn't see any shafts of light. And I was like, dude, these aren't working. He's like, well, those are the bulbs we have. I said, no, we got to change this. And so I literally drove 30 minutes to a Home Depot and found bulbs that were spottier and bought them out of every single bulb they had, took them back, and we changed them out together. And so that got me the light from above, which was really important to me. But then, yeah, I'm glad it felt organic to you, because there's big bounces, and this is a credit to Mateo too. I mean, there's big bounces with big lights playing into them and coming back and keying my actors. There's a shot online too, and I can direct you to it at some point, of Chris speaking to his lead elf and the general
Yeah.
in sort of like a triangle when they're talking on the factory floor. And yeah, there's big bounces coming back and shaping the light, which I think is really beautiful. But then the elves are back there, under the lights that we've placed. There's Kino flows and other devices inside the factory equipment to make that glow and make that look really interesting. And so, yeah, I started in my mind with some reference photos that I saw from actual Industrial Revolution factories. And then there was actually, of all things, somebody had done a boxing promo for not Saul Alvarez. I can't think of he used to go by Saul Alvarez. Canelo.
Oh,
So
Canelo.
there was a promo. Yeah. There was a promo for Canelo, and in this promo they had these. It was in the ring, but it was in this. It wasn't exactly a factory space, but it was like a warehouse space, and they had a lot of those here.
I've seen it. Yeah,
and I was like, "That's beautiful."
Yeah,
I was like, "That's what I want to do, but on a larger scale." So it's just like it's always keeping your eyes open and looking at things for inspiration. So I took those two things and I fused them together, and that's where the look from the factory came from.
Now, you saying that, and obviously saying it was called from you, the DP who filmed there, and then from the audience, I'll be like, wow, this is very warm and welcoming. And you can see there's like a different type of how you feel and what I see, which is insane.
So that was really important to me too, because Chris is a wonderful character. He's a giving man. He's got this hard exterior, but that he's a good man. And I didn't want it to feel like the elves were in a sweatshop. I didn't want people to think that the elves were miserable. So it was important to me that it still felt, even though it felt industrial in the makeup, it still felt like a place that they enjoyed being. So that was the balance that I was working with that one.
Wow. I'm learning so many things from you today.
Man, that's great.
Another thing. So again, most of today's generation or youngers, they tend to focus more on cameras and all this. Mm-hmm. The question is, what would you say is the camera and lens of your choice, and when do you get to choose that?
So this is really interesting because I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. I sent another DP, a guy by the name of Chris Stacy, who's a great DP as well. I sent him the list of what I shot, like my last 5 or 6 movies on. So I just did I Can Only Imagine 2, and I shot that on, we had 4 Arri 35s, and I shot that on, for the first time, it was the first time I did an anamorphic picture. So I shot that on the Hawk Vintage 74s, and those lenses are filled with character. They're beautiful, they're super interesting. And, like I said, I've been super blessed, and our deal allowed us to also carry a set of Cook anamorphics. So I had Cook anamorphics to back up my Hawk anamorphics.
Nah, that's why you came ready.
Which was amazing, because there were situations where the vintage 74s, they have such an interesting flare characteristic. I was doing an outside scene around a campfire, and some of the wood was blocking the flames. And to camera, it was going like this weird flare blow. So I literally had to switch after the first take to the Cooks because the fire looked crazy. So it's also anticipating things like that. I anticipated that these lenses, when I test them, are gorgeous, but so full of character that there was going to be a situation where, like, I might be in a house and looking at a window, and all of a sudden this whole window was just hazed out, like to the point where I couldn't shoot it. So I was prepared for that, So back to your question about the camera and lenses stuff. So that was on the A35 with Hawk Vintage 74s. The movie before that, I shot on the Sony Venice with Canon K35 and FDs. That was a period piece set in 1914.
Yeah.
The movie before that was Flight Risk, and I shot that on the Sony Venice again. And I made that decision because I needed a small enough body to fit inside of that practical airplane. And I shot that on Panavision VA lenses, which are vintage rehoused Panavision glass.
Yeah.
The movie before that was Red Right Hand. And it was Unsung Hero, which I shot on the Mini LF, which, if you're asking me, I think in my heart, the Mini LF is still my favorite camera. I like shooting large format. I love the airy look. I shot that on K35s and FDs. The first time I ever shot the K35s, fell in love with them. Absolutely love them. The movie before that was Mini LF again, but with Blackwings. I shot the Tribe 7 Blackwings on that one. And then the movie before that, which is the last one I'll tell you about, was Mini LF with Airy DNA, which was Fatman. So
Okay.
I've been all over the place. And again, I think it goes to trying to find what's right for the project, what's right for the director, what's right for the overall look. You know,
Yeah.
I like to test the stuff and then go to the directors with what I think are the right choices and let them weigh in on it. So this last one, I had never shot anamorphic. The director had shot most of his movies anamorphic. I went to, use your resources. I used the Shot Deck Shootout that's online, the anamorphic shootout.
Yeah.
And I pulled them all up in the office and I was like, here's some lenses, here's some lenses, here's some lenses. Which one do you like the flares from best? Which one do you like like, is there too much fall off on the ends? Like, because these I feel like have too much fall off. I don't feel like it's going to be good for what we're doing. So I gave them my opinions and I let them look at them. They loved the Kawas that they used
Oh
part of
yeah.
them on A Star Is Born.
Yeah,
But I'm
yeah.
like, that's really, really a lot of look, and the edges are not very sharp, and there's going to be issues at times. And so we like the flares on those the best, but then, we liked how the Cooks rendered really nice. But the other thing is the Cooks, when you look at them compared to the Hawks, people's faces stretched out on the Cooks. They definitely
Yeah.
looked wider on the Cooks than on the Hawks. So you got to also be careful in how you do that. So I gave them all the best information that I had. We looked at these clips,
Yeah.
and then we made the decision to look at the vintage 74s, and that's what we ultimately went with.
Do you think your lighting approach, I think I might know the answer, but do you think is naturalistic or stylized?
I would call my lighting a stylized naturalism. It's funny because I'm not the DP who's going to walk into the room for the most part and shoot it docu style. I'm probably going to shape it a little bit. Like I will find the best light in the room, and sometimes that might just mean throwing up negative on one side of the room, and maybe not even bringing in a light. But I want it to have a shape to it. I want it to have a character to it. I want it to feel beautiful. And sometimes the beauty is the harshness of it. When I say beautiful, it doesn't necessarily mean like technically beautiful.
Yeah.
I just want it to have a feel, and I want it to elicit something from you. If you walk into a room and it's white walls and it's flat lighting, you're not going to get the feeling that you need if a character is going through something really heavy and really dark. You have to make sure that your lighting matches the tone of the scene. And that's what I mean by stylized naturalism. I'm not gonna let the movie not reflect what the characters are going through.
You spoke a bit about collaboration. And the question, how do you collaborate with Key Grip or anyone else like in that department? Because I feel like most of the time on a lower budget, we have to like, oh, this is what I'm thinking. We cannot have this. And does that happen before or like how does that happen?
Yeah, so man, it's really interesting because when I was younger in my career, I felt like with my gaffer and my key grip, especially, that I had to ride them and I had to be on top of them for every single thing, and I had to tell them what unit to use and where to put it and how to do it. As I go along further and further in my career, I think the level of the people that I'm working with has gone up as well. And now it's more a conversation. I'm going, okay, in this scene, I feel like this is going on. So give me a hard push from this side. When the character's over here, I want them to fall off here. Then when we're in this part of the scene, just give me just an eye light and a little bit of a backlight. So it's more just general conversations about what I'm looking for. And then when you're working with people on that level, hopefully, and I've been blessed in the last couple movies where they start to learn your style right away. And that was a big one for me. A gaffer by the name of Jay Bassnett in Tulsa. When I took over that movie, we really had to trust each other because I dropped in 48 hours before the movie was starting. So I didn't even have a chance to really like talk with him. And that dude, he learned my style so quickly that I probably had less conversations with him during the movie than any other gaffer I've ever worked with, because he was just so in tune. He watched, he looked, he tried to feel what I responded to, and then he would run with that. So when you start moving up and you start working with the right people, they should anticipate based on your style. And I make a big point of it before, like even with that movie, I sent him 3 or 4 of my movies and said, look at this. This might not be the kind of movie we're making, but look at what I'm doing and how, my aesthetic and the way that I like to do things. And then we had conversations based on that. He said, I saw that you like to do, X in this situation and that you like to do Y in this situation. Is that how you like to approach it? And then it was like, yes, no. And then we moved forward from there, and it was awesome.
What would you say you have learned right now that could have changed your life when you started that you didn't know?
Wow. I mean, honestly, it's a pre-production thing. It doesn't matter if you're getting paid. Sit down and figure it out. Really think it through. And even if you're the only one, like I said, it's an exercise. It's an exercise that you should get good at and be comfortable with, because it's something that's going to help you no matter what. You know, if you walk into a scene and the actors throw it all out the window, that this guy doesn't want to be by the window, he wants to be against the white wall, you know, and there's directors who will be like, no, we need you over here, right? And in that situation, great, you got it covered, right? But there's other directors that I've worked with that are like, no, the actor wants to do this, so we're going to do this. So have a plan, roughly know what you want to do. Then you'll at least have thought about the space and the scene and how things move. And then if it all gets thrown out the window, you'll have a better chance at surviving that day. You know, you can't get so locked in your pre-production that you can't pivot off of it, you know, because that's a challenge in itself. But if you've at least thought the scene through and kind of understand the space, you'll be able to pivot when you need to.
Okay, so speaking about understanding the space, let's talk flight risk.
Yeah.
When I saw the behind the scene, but I had to go back to the email, like, we still need to have that conversation. How challenging was flight risk?
Man. So I remember when Mel sent me that script, because that was during the pandemic that he sent me that script. And I read it. I was like, oh, great. I get to do a movie with Mel Gibson, and it's contained. It's going to be super easy. And I was like, wait a second. It's all in one location. How do I keep this movie interesting? You know? And so that was a challenging one, because I think a lot of people instantly jump to, how did you keep the camera moving? How did you, where did you place the camera? Where did you do that kind of stuff? 50% of it is that, yes. But when you look at that movie, Mel did something really smart, and it really made my job harder and easier at the same time. He wanted that last scene, and it wasn't like this in the original draft. He wanted the last scene when the plane comes to rest on that runway to be at night. But he wanted the movie to start during the day. So this is great. It gives me a lighting arc throughout the entire movie. You have many, many different looks in that movie. You have the look when they're sitting on the runway at the beginning.
Yeah.
You have sort of this bluer look with harder sun when they first get up in the air.
Yeah.
Then they go into the clouds, which creates a completely different look. Then they go on, and it's a later afternoon, lower sun. Then it becomes like straight magic hour. Then it goes into this beautiful purple tone before it turns into this like blue hour, just barely sun remaining. And that became a really key piece of the movie, was that blue hour, because I needed a bridge to get that airplane down out of the sky, because I don't have the firepower to light a plane approaching from a half a mile away coming into a runway. So my pitch to Mel was, I said, let me go up, put a camera on that runway, run that camera for 2 hours, look what, take it over to a facility where we can color grade, see how far we can push it up and how far we can pull it down and what our time window was. After I did that test, I said, we have 90 minutes to make this happen. So we got to get this plane approaching in 90 minutes and bouncing off the runway. So, because the way the movie works, that plane approaching is all practical. It's all real. That plane hitting the first time and bouncing twice is all real. And after that, it becomes a full CG build. It's all, that plane is no longer real. So we needed to get that approach. But we had such an extensive shot list of what we wanted to do, and it was all helicopter to airplane. I only had one ground camera, one crash camera, and then the helicopter. So getting enough coverage in 90 minutes when you have moving pieces like emergency vehicles running down the thing, a helicopter in the air, an airplane coming in that can only do so many, you can only get so many takes in 90 minutes. All those lighting towers, they're always, if you watch, they're always facing camera. Like, you'll never notice this, but so halfway through the scene, I had to flip all those towers and point them the other direction. So it's stuff like that you don't take into account. And so I pitched that we do this at Blue Hour, so that by the time that plane stops rolling, you believe that it's black night outside. And that's exactly what we did. And that's one of the things that I'm probably most proud of in my career. And years earlier, I would have freaked out. I would have had no idea how to do it. But I had taken 20 plus years of experience and said, okay, the only way we can pull this off is to shoot it at this blue hour and print it up or print it down to match so that you feel by the time. And there's so much action that takes place in between, the plane spinning around, things flying off, that you can sneak it to complete blackness by the time that plane is done rolling. And that's exactly what we did.
When I watched that, I had this moment where I'm like, how did John manage to decide what shot to prioritize and what not in that time? That must have been very, very hard.
It was. And so we had the unit that shot the plane coming in and bouncing.
Yeah.
We had to shoot that before we shot the movie. So that was all shot before we did anything on the volume.
Oh,
so that was tricky in itself, because what we had was we had a 3-day unit where Fred North flew this helicopter through the Sierra Mountains with this long line, a 30-foot cable with this stabilized torpedo on the front of it, and six red V Raptors in portrait mode, shooting, up and down so that we could record these absolutely gorgeous, most beautiful plates I've ever seen, rock solid stabilization. Right. And that's what's played on the volume.
That's like 20-something K in resolution, isn't it?
I think it was like 24K resolution on the wall. It was crazy.
It was
gorgeous, most beautiful plates. And because we shot them vertical, we could move them up and down. So the horizon, so we could put the horizon where we needed it to be out the windows, which was amazing. So that in itself was amazing, but we had to shoot that before, because this was in May and the snow was going to start to melt in the Sierras, and it needed to feel like nowhere, Alaska. So that had to go up before we started shooting in June. And so after we did that, because the helicopter was there and the plane was there, we had to shoot that touchdown. Yeah. So it's not the way I would have chosen to shoot it, because what you probably don't realize, because nobody realizes, is that airport is actually 2 airfields. There's one in Bishop, California, where the plane hits the first couple times, and then the second half of it, where the plane starts to come apart and the emergency vehicles, is a mixture of an airport in Bishop, California, and Mesquite, Nevada. So two completely different airports. We did a lot of plate work on the airport in Mesquite, Nevada, where we flew FPV drones down through the emergency vehicles. Yeah. And I think if you look closely, some of the emergency vehicles change. They're not even always the same emergency vehicles. So they're as closely matched as possible, but it's really interesting. There's a cheat in there where Mark Wahlberg was never out on that runway with us, even though there's a shot where you clearly see him on that airfield.
Was that CGI or how did that happen?
So we shot him blue screen on the stage in reverse. So he's actually he's rolling away from us as we pull back at 12 frames a second. So when it's sped up, it's going the other direction. It's cruising forward at a normal speed, and he's coming up in the frame. And so that's how we did this. So that was against blue screen on the volume. And then we shot a plate that we were pushing towards just the background on set with the FPV drone. And those shots are married together to make the shot that's in the movie, which I won't say what it is. I don't want to give anything away, but
how do you sleep at night knowing that tomorrow I've got this crazy busy day? Like, do you get stressed and think about it?
Of course, man. I think no matter what it is, you could put me on a corporate video tomorrow and I'd be stressed because I care about what I do, and I give everything the same value. You could hire me to shoot a kid's birthday party, and I'd feel the same. Not that you'd hire me to shoot a kid's birthday party, but you know what I mean. I could go to do a friend a favor and shoot something for them, and I'll give it the same value that I did working for Mel. It's just because I love what I do and what I care, and it's all about my reputation. But on that scale, you get nervous, but again, it comes back to planning. All that stuff was planned out. I mean, I had an incredible on-set and pre-production visual effects supervisor. He's not responsible for the VFX that are in the movie, but he was responsible for managing all the volume work and guiding us through that process. This guy by the name of Michael Ralla. Amazing. And so he really helped me understand a lot of these bigger things that I've never done. He ended up being the visual effects supervisor on Sinners. So he's a great dude, and he really helped guide me through this process, from the plate work to acquiring the plates that are used in the sequence where, like I said, the stuff like the camera pushing at Mark Wahlberg, where the CG plane would take over the plates where you're shooting, there's nothing there. So previs is really important. He had entire previs sequences that we then looked at. We signed off on, we like the shot, we don't like this shot, let's do this, let's do that. And then we would run them by Mel, and Mel would sign off on what he liked and what he didn't like. And then what we did was we took the scene and broke it down and said, okay, this is a plate shot. So we made big boards that had all the frames up on them. And then we took that out on the runway with us on that last night and just crossed them off. We would shoot them and cross them off. And that's the only way I feel like you can do it without getting lost in a situation like that. You know, you got to know what you're going to do, or it's just going to be pandemonium.
Speaking about being lost in a situation, do you know when I saw this film, right? My thought process was like, okay, what happened when they give you a topic that you know nothing about? Airplane, flying, altitude. Do you hire someone to come in and supervise who understand the world around?
Yeah, they always get a consultant on something like that to try to be on set to, you know, I mean, Mark's got to look like he knows how to fly a plane, right? It's not like he's just going to like push a few buttons and like, so, you know, down to the call letters on the airplane and how they would say it as they're taking off. You know, if you're going to do a movie about a heart surgeon, you don't want him to look like he doesn't know how to use a scalpel, right?
Did that also help you as a DP to just like, okay, get a few pointers from the people like?
It does, because it just like spurns on your creativity and your mind starts thinking, and they're like, okay, if I'm going to do this, then how would I cover that? You know, I think it's really interesting because if you look at, and this is something that's always been really interesting to me, you know, foreign DPs have always excelled in America, right? You have these amazing European DPs who've done really well in America. And I think it's because it's an outside perspective. And I think there's a curiosity about it. It's like if you drop me in Europe right now to shoot a movie, things are going to look different to me because I haven't grown up with it. It hasn't been around me. And I think the way you look at things is probably less jaded than the way you look at things in your real life.
Yeah.
So I think there's something really special about that. So when I get dropped into an environment about something I don't know, I become curious about it. And I think, okay, what's the most interesting way to shoot this thing that I've never seen and don't understand?
Okay, you just spoke about curiosity. One curious thing that I have for myself and for other audiences, we have a guy called Samuel in this studio. He buys cameras every day. And here's the question. Do you think it's important to rent or buy as a DP?
Wow, that's an interesting question. So I currently own 2 cameras, and they're 2 Panasonic Evo ones. Those are the only cameras I own. And obviously, you know, I shot the launch film for them. Yeah. So I use those cameras for all the little commercials I do, all the corporate stuff I do, all that kind of stuff. When I go onto the movies, everything is rented. You know, you're talking about such a high price point, and the technology turns over. It's not like back in the film days where you would buy a camera and that camera was good forever, right? Until the pins fell off. Like this now, the technology changes.
Oh yeah.
And I don't really know where we're headed. For a minute, it looked like everything was going to be full frame.
Yeah.
And then Arri drops to 835, and all of a sudden everybody's shooting 35 again, right? So I don't know where it's headed. If there were a camera, like if there were a 265 that were a price point that I felt like would be worthwhile, like the Arri 265 is gorgeous. I tried to shoot my last movie on it, but it's a little outside of the budget. And these days, man, to be honest with you, it's not about the camera. It's about the storytelling and what you do with whatever device. I mean, I've seen people make stunning films that are compelling that are shot on an iPhone, right? It's what you do with it. I don't get tangled up in the technology and the equipment the way maybe some other people do. And I think that shows in the fact that I've changed my gear on almost every single movie. And I think being tied to a particular lens or a particular camera limits you. I think you have to have your mind open and look at everything objectively. I don't want my decisions to be made by a financial factor.
According to the American Cinematographer magazine,
okay,
obviously you know what I'm about to say. Johnny Derango, you are in 12 cinematographer to watch out for. How's that feeling? I'm excited on your behalf.
That was amazing, man. That was 2017 or 2018. That was Small Town Crime got me a little bit of notice. And I have to say, still to this day, that's one of the films that I'm most proud of. I feel like that was, looking back at my career, that was the movie that was the biggest leap forward for me, because it was everything that I knew that I could do in the way that I wanted to shoot, but the opportunity that I'd never been presented to do.
Oh,
So I was coming out of having just done two movies with the Nelms brothers. I did Lost on Purpose, which I love. It's a little tiny movie set on a dairy farm in the middle of Central California.
yeah.
A movie that never got a big release, and people haven't seen in the way that I wish they did, because I think it's a really great, just slice of life movie. Then we went into Waffle Street, which is a very straightforward dramedy, very high key. And that's a moment looking back on my career where I wish that I had trusted my instincts and made the movie that I wanted to make instead of making the movie that I thought I was supposed to make. Because in my career, it's probably the most overlit movie that I've ever done. And it doesn't feel like me. And so Small Town Crime was my answer to that. It was the movie that I wanted to be making. And I felt like the directors trusted me enough to let me off my chain and let me do what I wanted to do. And that movie got me the notice that I had been, hoping for.
Yeah, how do you create a world that feels grounded in reality, but still visually elevated and emotionally resonant? I'm actually referring to the homestead scene and to the factory floor, because those things, like I said in the previous film, that was really good.
That's really interesting, because it's something that's my natural inclination. I want something that feels organic to the space, but also feels crafted. And I think there's times that people go with things that are organic to the space, but don't feel crafted. And that's something that I really, really push for when I work with directors. I want it to look like it belongs in the story, belongs in the environment, but it doesn't feel sloppy. And so that's something that I really look to do. I want it to be beautiful, but I want it to be authentic. So that's the balance you have to find, because you can go too far one way or the other. And like I said, in Waffle Street, I went too far to this needs to be a high key comedy. And it wasn't authentic to the space.
Right.
It was authentic to the material, I thought, but it just didn't work out the way I wish it would have worked out. Now, Fatman and Small Town Crime, I feel like are dead on those worlds. Like, they create a world and you live in that world, and it's a world that, is beautiful, even with the violence and the things that are going on. It feels authentic, but it feels beautiful.
Another question is, what do you think is the biggest mistake that young DPs make when trying to make their work look cinematic?
Pulling every light off the truck. Because I did it too. When you're young.
We're all guilty of that.
100%, because you're trying to prove to everybody around you that you know what you're doing. If I can get away with an edge light and an eye light now, I will, if it feels right. It comes with being comfortable in your own skin and not feeling people are constantly looking over your shoulder and judging you. And I wish I'd realized that even when I was younger in my career, to your point, because there was times where I had an AD who was working on big stuff go, hey man, your first setup looks better than most people's third setups, when you're getting ready. And I would still just micro, adjust and do this and do that. And sometimes you just have to let it go. This is my biggest piece of advice, at least the way I look at my career and myself. You're your toughest critic. Because I'll look at other people's work that I know is not as good as mine, and I'll be like, man, that's brilliant. I wish I was doing stuff like that. And it's just because I'm judging every single thing. I know what went into it. I know where I feel like I failed, and I feel like I didn't quite get it exactly where I wanted it, and that's all I can see. And then other people look at your work and they're like, damn, that's beautiful, right? And it's hard to separate yourself from the art.
Yeah.
Somebody was telling me the other day, and I think it was Joel Smallbone through this guy, Caden Tooley, through a mentor of his. He said, if you're doing a painting, right, and don't hold the artwork up in front of your chest. When people take shots at it, it goes right through your heart. Hold it off to the side, because it's still a part of you, but it goes right through, and it separates the art from the artist. I was like, that's pretty brilliant.
Nah, that's very brilliant. That's really, now if you think about it deep, it's really, really brilliant. Right. So here's another question. As a DP, would you rather watch a film with good cinematography, very bad storyline, or very bad storyline, good cinematography?
I'd rather watch the movie that's compelling. And that's one thing that I have to remind myself. And sometimes when you're when you're too into the minutia of it and you're worried about your job and not the movie, that's where things go sideways. So for me, it's always story first. And if I have to cut a corner in my work to give the director more time with an actor, or do something that allows an actor to move in a place that I'm not ready for them or don't want them to go, I'll figure out a way to do it. Because at the end, when I was a kid and I was sitting in my bedroom and I was watching movies, it wasn't about the cinematography. It was about the story and connecting to the material. And so my job, like I said, I'm the salt on the dish to enhance the dish. I'm not there to take over the dish.
I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna, hey, what do you want to do? Listen, I'm just here to accentuate the film. That's my job.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I look at what I do.
Honestly, brother, I really appreciate you so much for joining me today. And it's been a long time waiting for this, and finally it happened.
You're a patient man, and I appreciate your tenacity.
I have to be patient. You're a busy man, and I have to respect everything you're doing. And obviously, it happened. That's the most important.
I love it, man. This has been lovely.